rooms at these other buildings, and that helps reduce this number here relative to our student population. And specialty rooms can be anything from computer labs to special programs that we might run here in our building, to the arts, the art rooms, the music rooms, dance, things of that nature. We have a lot of special programming here, and that's great for our kids, don't get me wrong. I think it's great to have that type of diversity. But if you look at our specialty rooms and then how it affects our regular classrooms compared to the regular classrooms and the student population, you'll see the regular classroom ratio compared to our population is a lot larger than it is relative to the other schools. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And then, of course, some of our teachers saw that they have dedicated teacher rooms by department in these other buildings because they have more space. We have 4 dedicated rooms, but it's not by department, okay? The large number at 100 and Central accounts for 2 school buildings. I just want you to know that. There's an upper building and a lower building. That's why they have 12. They have 6 in one, 6 in the other. So it's really the regular classrooms for us that have presented a problem in terms of doing this. Unit lunch information. I wanted to break some of this down for you too. Have unit lunch times running across the top. They run anywhere from 41 to 52 minutes. I know when I was at Watchung Hills, they're about 44 minutes. And as you work down the columns, because I'll do that, I'll work this way, just so you have an understanding of what we looked at. Because I know there's been talk about food production here, and our cafeteria was originally built, if you're going to do a unit lunch, was originally built for, a smaller number of students other than almost 1,900. But at West Windsor, Plainsboro North, there's a large main cafeteria, and there's 8 points of service, meaning 8 areas students can make their way through and pay for their food. There's a dining room, eating locations on each side of that cafeteria, so they sort of spread out and go this way into each separate dining room. And one of the other features is there's a very, very large, wide hallway that runs down the middle of the building where they set up tables for students to eat. And that's part of the program there. They set up before the unit lunch down the main hallway, and they don't have to set up tables in the dining areas, but down the hallway there's a lot of space to set up tables and sort of ancillary hallways where they set up seating for students to eat. Another feature is students may leave for lunch. So if you're going to talk about producing something for students to eat, if you have anywhere from, I think according to the principal, there's 200, 250 students that may leave for lunch, well, you're not really feeding, over 1,400 kids in a given time with their capacity. You're probably feeding anywhere from, 1,150 to 1,200 students, okay? At Chatham, their school's a little bit smaller, but their unit lunch time is larger, and like West Windsor, they allow their seniors to leave for lunch, and according to Darren Groh, the principal, they probably have anywhere from about 200 students that would leave for lunch every day, so you're looking at feeding about 1,100 students. There's a main cafeteria with 5 points of service, but there's also an adjacent area where you can pre-order food. So students can actually pre-order and just go and pick up and pay virtually. There's a main cafeteria that they use for seating. There is a gym where they roll out a tarp and set up tables in it, pretty tight, but they get a whole bunch of students in there in one of their ancillary gyms. And then they have their main gym, where they roll out the bleachers and students can sit in the bleachers and eat. Montgomery, there's a main cafeteria, very big. It must seat probably 800 kids. 6 points of service, 1 serving area, but there's also a satellite serving area where they roll down a hot food to serve that's down a main hallway. One thing about Montgomery that stood out is also besides the main cafeteria, they're able to set up ancillary tables in certain very large areas where students can sit and eat. And there's actually designated spots per fire code, and I saw the markings on the floor where they have to set up those tables. So there's more of an open floor plan that would allow for tables without impeding on fire code. 100 and Central is sort of a whole different ballgame. You have 2 different buildings. There's 1 main cafeteria and 6 points of service in each building, and also 2 satellite cafeteria areas for students to sit and eat and have roll-out hot kiosk type of things for them to serve food at. They eat in the cafeteria spaces in each building, in the main gym, and this was the only school that at least I observed where students are actually sitting in the hallway, not using tables. They do use their main gym in each building to sit students to eat, but they also have those cafeteria areas. But there were students in the main building sitting because they didn't have hallways that were big enough that could account for fire code, just like, unlike West Windsor, let's say. So looking at those specs in terms of buildings, I don't know here that we have those type of hallways where we could set up tables, but that's something we'd have to look at in terms of capacity to be able to produce for students. So those are the uniquenesses about those unit lunches for those schools. Teacher feedback. So after we went on these visits, I sent out a survey that not only surveyed teachers, but also students, and I'll get to the students in a second. Based upon your visits, this was a question posed to the teachers, which schedule do you feel would best fit Ridge High School? 80% of them said rotating drop, 20% said day 1, day 2. So the overwhelming majority felt that a rotating drop schedule they liked better for Ridge. Now, I think personally, in talking to some of them, and I'll get to some of this in a minute, I think they felt that the transition from 42-minute classes to 55 to 60-minute classes would be easier to do than trying to transition to an 80 to 85-minute class. Teacher feedback. Identify the benefits of the schedule you prefer. So for a rotating drop schedule, for those that preferred that, they felt it was good that they'd see students at varied times each day. So when a rotating drop schedule happens, the periods switch. So period 1 doesn't occur every day, and they thought that was beneficial. Longer class periods, more beneficial for instruction, less transitions. Flexibility with unit lunch, meaning is there an opportunity for clubs to meet? Is there an opportunity to do other things during a unit lunch? And I can tell you, some of the schools doing unit lunch don't allow anything to happen other than students to eat. Other schools may have music lessons and allow pullouts for labs during that unit lunchtime once a week. So they felt there's some flexibility there. Intermittent break from each class, so you're not meeting every class every day. Greater teacher prep time. They felt that they'd have more prep time, and that was some of the feedback they got from the teachers they met with. Here it is. Easier to transition to 60 minutes of instruction than 80 minutes of instruction. That was one of the things they felt was beneficial. No science lab pullout out of phys ed, because the pullouts and any rotating drop were occurring out of the lunch period. For day 1, day 2 teachers who preferred this better, no science lab pullouts at all. They do their labs within that 80 to 85-minute block, so you're not even taking them out of a unit lunch. Longer periods with students allows for a wider variety of teaching and learning strategies, fewer transitions. So even with a day 1, day 2, because you're only having 4 classes a day versus 6, you'd have even less transitions. More prep time for teachers. They felt the schedule in day 1, day 2 is simpler and less complicated. 4 classes one day, 4 classes the next, back to the same 4, et cetera, et cetera. With a rotating drop, you have days A, B, C, and D, where you'd have certain periods rotating in and out. You'd have to be able to keep track of that. Now, there are many schools that do it, and I think it's doable, but this is some of the feedback from those from day 1, day 2. Again, flexibility with unit lunch. They had some of the same things they were talking about in terms of clubs meeting or doing other things. And they said break from each class every other day. And that's the nature of a day 1, day 2 schedule. They were asked, identify the concerns to be addressed with a schedule change, whether it's rotating drop or day 1, day 2. Unit lunch, supervision, seating options, food production capacity, things we've talked about. Our facility size and capacity in general. Classroom space, are we going to be able to fit what we now schedule across 9 periods into 8 periods? Professional development for staff. So staff can't follow the same 42-minute model that they followed all the time, or they've been following. Absent students miss more material based on the schedule, and based on the schedule may not see a class for several days. So if you're absent, we have a snow day, you may not see a class for days that was some of the concerns that teachers had, and how do we deal with that? Another thing, may not allow for repetition needed in certain classes. So, foreign language or math, is it beneficial or more beneficial to see those classes every single day if you're into the, for foreign language, you want them speaking every day. Some of the foreign language teachers had concerns that I'm not going to see these kids every day and I need that repetition. Impact on time for the performing arts. So now, our students are pulled out of lunch to do lessons. Well, how does this impact lessons? Some schools didn't allow lessons out of unit lunch, others did. So that's something you have to look at for your particular school. Student feedback. Okay, based on your visits, which schedule do you feel would best fit Ridge High School? So it was unanimous. All the students felt that the rotating drop schedule was more beneficial for them. Again, I don't know the specifics other than speaking to some of them, and I think the 60 versus the 80 minutes they felt was an easier transition in terms of class time. So identify the benefits of the schedule you prefer. Rotating drop, increase class time, socialize or get extra help during unit lunch. They thought it was a good break. Variation in class meeting times, meaning period one is not always first each day, And I think some of the feedback from teachers from those other schools was, yeah, there's a difference between a kid sitting in your class period one and then you have them third period of that day or, 10 o'clock in the morning. Get an intermittent break from each class meeting, okay? So a rotating drop every third day, that class drops out and you get a break. Less stress regarding homework because of class rotation, so you're not on every single night. Less transition between classes, you're not up and down over 9 periods. And again, some of them said this to me, and I felt it myself, a sense of calm in the building. And I think it's because of less transition. Student feedback on concerns. Identify the concerns to be addressed with a schedule change. Your building capacity to have a unit lunch. Some schools accomplish this through an open campus for seniors. Not sure this is feasible here, okay, in terms of the amount of time and the ingress and egress. This is some of the concerns they raised. Not having each class every day may hurt retention of material. That was something raised by teachers. Potential for cheating or academic integrity. So this is something that was brought up that if a class is giving a test, let's say a math class on Monday, and those students have that test, but I'm a student that has that test dropping into my schedule on Tuesday, well, is there a chance that students who took the test Monday may converse with those on Tuesday? Possibly. Teachers would need professional development to adapt to a new schedule, of course. Impact on academics, if absent or missed class because of field trips or sports, something that was raised by staff members in terms of absentee students and missing classes. You might not see your class over multiple days. How would music lessons and labs work with a unit lunch? So there was concerns expressed by students of how to make that work. As I said, some schools allow it during unit lunch. Others sort of hold that time as sacred and say, no, this is our unit lunch. This is all we're doing. You're eating, socializing, and taking a break. Overall feedback, so from staff and students, the question was asked on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, to 5 being strongly agree, should Ridge change from a 9-period day to a block-type schedule? 65% said strongly agree, 20% agree, 15% were neutral, none disagreed or strongly disagreed. So the majority agree or strongly agree that there should be some type of change affected, okay? And that's staff and students together combined. Other considerations. Now, these are things that I jotted down. West Windsor and Chatham allow seniors to leave campus during unit lunch. And again, I've mentioned that, but that goes to capacity to create or produce for students, okay? Food and having them get through the unit lunch. Another thing, when these 4 schools changed schedules, they were on an 8-period day with multiple lunch periods, 7 classes plus a lunch period. So that's different from what we're trying to do because they went from an 8-period day to an 8-period day with a unit lunch in the middle. We're trying to take what's now classes spread over 9 periods and now spread them across 8 periods. And that sort of ties in with what I showed you previously with 47 regular classrooms to do that. All right, that's where we have some difficulty. West Windsor students must have a study hall in their schedule. That's part of it. Approximately 2/3 of Chatham students choose to have a study hall in their schedule. Now, why do we bring that up? Well, study halls in these schools are held in cafeterias during unit lunch, or during other than unit lunch. So when we have study halls here, we can't have our study halls in cafeteria all the time because 5 periods of the day, we're serving lunch. That takes kids and puts them in lecture halls or other classrooms where we could otherwise hold regular classes. So when you have study halls taking up classroom space or lecture hall space, that's problematic. These schools have a situation where their study halls can be held in a cafeteria, doesn't take up classroom space. Consideration with Hunterdon Central, they have 2 school buildings. They have a lot of space there. I think it's important to note that because they're not struggling to find space sort of like we are, okay? I mean, so there's sort of an anomaly in this equation. And then the conclusions of our scheduling consultant who was here, Mr. Merenblum, I linked that here, and I'll refer you to specifically page 7. Now, I know he went through this, but in his overall summary, I think bullet 2 here, he speaks to believing that we're going to need more classroom space to make this happen. And he estimated 5 to 10 classrooms based on going from 9 periods of scheduling to 8 periods of scheduling, where the schools we visited didn't have that dilemma when they made that change. So it's important to make note of that and some of those conclusions because, yes, we do have a space issue here in terms of what's available to spread out our classes going from 9 to 8 periods. All right, so I just wanted to share that. It's linked to this presentation, but here are the summary of the conclusions, and the important one, of course, is the need for space. So that's just the recap of the visits. I think they were very productive. I think we got a lot of good, valuable information out of that. I think the feedback from our teachers and students suggests that this is something we should really, really consider moving forward. Like I said, my impression when I was there was you had a different building environment, whether it was day 1, day 2, or rotating drop. And I think that can be effectuated here as well. I do. But there are logistical things to deal with before getting there. Okay? So thank you very much.
Okay. You got all that? That was a lot. So maybe we could take some questions from the board for starters. How about we work backwards, since Drew is still on his feet? And we'll go backwards from Drew to Karen to Stephanie, if you have any questions. So, any board member questions? Do you remember any of that you have a question about? That was a lot.
So were any of the students or administrators in the buildings that you visited, did any of them have, because I'm assuming that most of them went through the same process that we're going through in evaluating what schedule to implement?
Okay, so that's a great question. Yes and no. There were some administrators that weren't there when the process was effectuated. So at West Windsor, Plainsboro, that principal wasn't there. They had to actually bring a staff member who was there 12 years ago to explain. And there was a lot of trepidation by teachers. They were worried about change. I think that's the big thing. But I can tell you that everyone that now has been in that schedule would never go back. You know, the change was tough. They didn't know what, it's the unknown. But by and large, all of them were saying this was one of the great things we did.
Did any of them have like buyer's remorse about going from rotating drop to day 1, day 2?
No, they all went from traditional.
No, but I'm saying in the exploratory phase, I'm assuming that they looked at both, and then they chose one of
Yeah,
those
no,
and
there
said,
was-
oh, I wish we would
No
have.
one expressed buyer's remorse.
Okay. And then, what about using the gym as an eating area? Was there any feedback? What? No, in their buildings. Was there any?
It doesn't seem to be an issue using a gym. You know, Chatham rolls out a tarp and lays out tables to protect their floor. But I think they say once the students get used to it and they clean up their mess and they know the expectations, that it really is not an issue at all.
And how do they assign the kids where to go for lunch?
You know, that's interesting. It seemed like they get there themselves. I mean, honestly, I mean, that was the feedback. It was like, you know, sort of like the freshmen end up in this area and the sophomores end up over here. And, you know, it was like, I don't know, natural selection, if you will. But, yeah, there were some that had, yeah, Central did have one gym that was assigned for seniors and juniors, I believe. But a lot of the seniors were also in the CAF area, the main dining area. So it didn't seem to be an issue in terms of where they ended up.
Yeah, okay. That was it for everybody.
Yeah.
Regarding the lunch, right?
Sure.
So I was looking at their capacity to make lunch. Is that very different from our?
I
I'm not talking
think
about
by and
seating, I'm
large,
talking about
yeah, I
capacity.
think by and large, the kitchen areas we saw were bigger. They
Bigger.
were bigger than ours, yes.
Like by like a lot?
Well, no, she asked by a lot. I don't think by a lot. I was sort of surprised that they weren't a lot larger, but they were larger. And they did have different areas where they served food in satellite locations.
Is that like a cart?
Yeah, a cart, they would run,
So they'd make
roll
the
like,
food all day,
they would
put
make
it in
the
a cart, and
food,
then take the cart to the other
correct,
side?
roll out the carts and serve there as well.
And then the
Warming bins, et cetera.
the ordering, the pre-ordering,
Yes.
did you think that was something that we could accomplish with what we have here? Like, you know, so with pre-ordering, maybe take all the pre-orders over there, or something like that? You know,
Well-
where kids could order in the morning and then it's
Yeah, well, that's what
ready.
happens at Chatham. They
Right.
do exactly that. They have an app, they order it on their, and then they pay for it with their app, and they just go and pick it up. So I think it helps to reduce the mass that goes
That's
there.
what I'm saying. So
But the principal at Chatham did share with me, he said, you know, we have a lot of kids that bring lunch, believe it or not. He said that. He's one of the few that said that
Well,
to
we never
me.
even talk about that. People do
Yeah.
bring lunch. I mean,
Correct. But he said we have a lot that bring lunch. Now, he couldn't give me a number, but he said there's a fair amount.
I mean, I don't know, how many do you know, how many bring lunch here? We wouldn't know
I
that,
don't
right?
know. I mean, we'd have to look at the data from what we churn out in terms of lunches each day and how many students are here. You know, I don't know that number.
Okay, my other question was about the classrooms.
Sure.
And I can't read this because I'm blind as that, but hold on a second. So there's the specialty rooms, that's the 25, right? Okay. And then there's the, small group instruction rooms.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm assuming the
Let
small
me get there.
instruction rooms are, is that what the special, they are special ed?
Yeah, there's like
program?
a special ed program room,
All
yes.
7 of those rooms?
Yes,
Okay, are there any special ed programs in the specialty rooms?
yes. And
How
those may
many
be
of
taking,
those?
those may be taking up whole classrooms.
Right, so do we know how many approximately?
I
are
think there's
special ed?
5.
So out of that 20, so that's 12 that really, that can't be touched.
Fair
Like, those are
statement.
12 rooms that we really have to keep untouched. So I mean, there's 20 rooms, which is still a lot more than all those other schools
Sure it
have,
is.
as specialty rooms that,
That-
could
that
they
could be-
possibly be flipped? Could you use them as
Well,
as
again, I
duals?
don't want to, I mean, we have computer rooms that, you know, if you get a cart, can you make it a classroom? I mean, you could look
Well,
at
can you
something
make a
like
classroom
that.
with computers? I don't know. I mean,
You know?
are 2 classes using a computer room? Like, are there a class, would there always be a class in the computer room when the classes are happening?
Most of the day there are, most of
Okay.
the day they're occupied, yes,
By a class?
by a class.
That's the thing you gotta remember.
Right.
Not just the fact that it's a specialty room, it's are your rooms used all day long?
Yes.
Right, okay. I was just curious as to, like, the
Yes.
breakout there. Okay. I'm a big fan of these schedules, by the way.
Mr. Byrne.
Is there any difference in the 5 or 10 rooms that we're missing between the 2 programs? Are they both the same, or
No, they're different, they may meet different needs. Oh, okay, I think it would be the same. It would be the same. Correct. Yeah, either way, you're going from spreading across 9 periods to 8 periods.
Have you worked on the details on, could we come up with the 4 rooms or 5 rooms through juggling?
Well, it would have to be collapsing some of these rooms like a computer room if we could do it. I mean, that would have to, we'd have to
So you
look at
haven't
that.
done the total research?
No, sir.
Yeah, we did.
Well,
We did, that's why, Eric, that's why we had the consultant come in. And so the issue there is not just how the rooms are categorized, it's do you need a room, and do you have classes running in all of your rooms? You can shuffle things around and put different things in different rooms and make more regular classrooms, right? But if you're still putting students in all those rooms to offer all the core sections that you're offering, you run out of rooms to put students in. So you know, you can't create it out of thin air. What you could try to do is offer less, right? And then that becomes a whole other question if you're taking away opportunities for students to say, we're going to collapse class size, we're going to run less of this, that, or the other thing, so that we're running less sections, so that we can take 9 pounds of stuff and put it in an 8-pound bag.
I was thinking of a large room divided.
Right, well, that would be like the lecture halls back here. And we talked about using lecture halls as classrooms, right? So that can
Not
help
now,
us
no.
get a couple of, we're saying need 5 to 10 rooms, so maybe that's a couple of 5 to 10.
right.
Sort of the same idea.
Along that same line, back in December when Mr. Marenblum was here, and you passed by the page in the slide, there was the table
Yes.
that showed the number of classrooms, and there were some questions raised that evening about the maximizing the efficiency of the sections that are running, because there are some classes running with very
Correct.
small numbers of sizes. Do we know what the netting out of looking at those efficiencies, what's the number?
I think we'll have a better sense of that in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
Selections from this year.
Okay, so we're going to use those
Yeah.
for that purpose?
This year to see if we can do any of that work.
Okay, wonderful.
Sure.
The school that lets the seniors leave for lunch, how were they processing the kids when they came back to school?
They swipe in and out on their computer system.
But they all go in like one entrance?
Yes, went on and out the other, same entrance, in and out. Yeah, it's a turnstile system through Genesis. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.
Does anybody have anything for Mrs. Hudok's presentation? We're going backwards. You have something? Oh, thank you.
I have trouble understanding what has changed. In other words, if I go back 15 years, 10, 5, and then today, how are the kids changed? Are they still, was suicide a problem 25 years ago? What has changed? I hear plans and meetings and programs, but no details on how the kids are changing and what's really the problem. I don't have any sense that we understand that at all, because it's all and here's what we're going to do. We're going to have programs, but no details on what you're going to try and accomplish.
So if you're speaking specifically to the United Way work that we're doing at the middle school on the opportunities, that is less focused on the suicide rates, which is the question that maybe Ms. Smith should be directed to about what it is that we're doing program-wise, both at the middle and the high school, for students who may be struggling with those particular issues. I don't know if you want to speak to that now or wait. As far as the clientele, the students 17 years ago, 20 years ago are very different than the students who are coming into our school now. There are many researchers that believe it has to do with their exposure to things that in my time, I didn't have a cell phone. I went outside and I played kickball in the street with my friends. They're so attached to that technology piece. They're so used to instant gratification in many ways. Their brain and the whole frontal developmental lobe of just a middle schooler, it really thrives on that. And we are seeing more and more of our students who are having opportunities to really overexpose themselves to things that they're emotionally, developmentally not ready. And just like middle schoolers grow at different rates, both academically and physically, their emotional development is also something that is at a different rate. And we have children who are exposing themselves through their own devices to things that many of us weren't exposed to our adult years, college years, and some still not yet. And so I think a lot of the difference that we're seeing in the students, at least from the middle school, has to do with really environmental issues. Middle schoolers, traditionally, if you look at those developmental stages from way back when, all of those things haven't changed. The way the brain develops, the way they interact hasn't developed. It's really what they're being exposed to that I'm seeing, specifically at William Ann, that's impacting their resiliency. And also the way we parent.
Now, see,
Myself included.
That I don't know how you're addressing that, and no one's talking at all about how you're addressing that. I think if you take it the next step, too, they're not marrying, they're waiting for a later age to get married, they're having fewer children, but I don't understand what you're going to try and do to fix that.
Well, I'm not going to fix how they're marrying people, I can tell you that. I'm being a late bloomer myself in that area. You know, as far as the suicide, I think we have so much in our curriculum now where we're identifying students so much sooner. And when you look at a child who's looking at our own statistics, the middle school statistics have significantly increased since the early 13 and 14 with the number of students who are coming to the school with lacking those soft skills, those resiliency skills that they're being taught elsewhere and in other locations, and some of them are just not developmentally being exposed to those things. And so I think as a school system, what we're doing is we train our students when they come into 6th grade with identifying the signals and feelings in their own body and in their own mind when they're not feeling well. We go through a pretty significant process of telling them when it is okay when you're feeling dark, how to get the help that you need, what are some of the statistics, what are some of the feelings or things that kids will say or do, so they can self-identify, but then we're also asking them to identify their peers. And so, for example, all of our health classes do an exit slip at the end of every single suicide training that they're doing in the health classes. And so each time the exit slip basically identifies, do you need to see someone? Do you know someone who needs to see someone? Have you felt like this? And it gives them a rating scale to rate themselves or just a friend. I can tell you that within my experience, our SACs do see an uptick in the number of students that come see them when we're doing those suicide type of preventions within our health curriculum. So that's one aspect that the middle school program we're doing, and there's still more work to be done on that as well, because it really takes a community approach. Communication from the parents, communication from the students, and really our way of managing all of those within our guidance and school counseling program as well as in our health curriculum.
I worry that we still don't understand what the differences are. So.
Noted. Yep, noted.
I think you'd be right to do that. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people doing a lot of work trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, noted, yeah.
What's going on with brain development, right? I mean,
It's so complex.
all the time, like, it's complex.
So complex, yeah.
And it really is. And I don't know that there's any expert that you're going to put in a room and say, what's the problem? They're going to rattle off, you know, the five bullet points and say, this is it, just do this.
Right. We've also noticed that each child, if we spend 95% of our time on 5% of the children because they're children. They're just so unique, and what works with one doesn't work with another, and we try to figure that out, and sometimes that takes a lot of time because of a child's openness and a family's willingness, and sometimes we can figure that out pretty quickly. You know, obviously our goal is to mitigate and manage and to create the care plan that Ms. Smith was talking about as soon as we can to avoid that continued feeling of, you know, depression or suicidal ideations or thoughts. But there is no answer. I'm sorry. I can't give you the definite on that one for sure. Anybody else have questions for me? Okay. Ms. Smith?
You're welcome. Questions for me?
Okay. Looking at some of the numbers with the counseling programs, you've listed the numbers of counselors to ratio of counselor to student in the elementary schools. I didn't see it with WAMS or Ridge, and I was just kind of curious about those ratios, where they stand, and are they sort of within the acceptable guidelines of what's current?
Sure. So definitely at the secondary level with WIMS and Ridge, the average is near the national recommendation, which is about 250. So that's definitely a nod to this district and the investment in counseling. That's the national recommendation, but it's not all that common across the nation to find that. So to have the staffing, particularly at the secondary level, around the 250 caseload number is impressive.
And you specifically talked about the number of visits to the counselors that didn't involve a whole slew of things, which obviously takes up a significant amount of time. And I think especially at Ridge, when you've got a huge college-bound student population, taking out the amount of hours that counselors might be spending on the college process is, where is it? Like, you know, how much time are they spending on that? And it seems to be missing in this. Do you feel like they're taking time away because the amount of time they're spending on counseling issues has gone up, and therefore they don't have time to deal with some of those kinds of issues, the college placement?
So I think it's important to recognize, and it's why I pointed out that it's often not mutually exclusive, the two. And so when you are talking about your 4-year plan within high school or your post-secondary plan, whatever that might look like, you know, the counselors are sticking with their kids for all 4 years. And so it's a benefit of that model where you're getting to know the students, the families, and developing that relationship. And so whatever bumps and curves are in the road along the way, the counselors know that child. And so when it comes time for specifically college planning and all of the time that that takes, you know, the counselors have worked with kids to develop relationships and to work through and to see them grow. And so coming into the door, you know, an issue might present itself like strictly academic, but usually most of the time when you peel away the layers, there's something else going on, not necessarily as always a root cause in and of itself, but it's related, right? And so if you're stressed about post-secondary, you're stressed about college, you know, there's usually something to connect with some of these mental health issues and to weave in. And so I wouldn't consider them separate issues that counselors deal with. It's often, you know, just the role of the counselor to have the intertwining play between mental health and post-secondary.
I do worry about the kids who don't have issues that they're going to their counselor routinely, and the fact that the counselors meet with them once 15 minutes to do scheduling and don't know them even when they get to the senior year. So, I mean, we're not getting a huge number of students who are represented in these graphs. Like, I don't think that they know them.
It's a good, you know, point to bring back to the team now that we have this data and so that we can think reflectively about the program. Yeah.
My question is maybe more of an observation. It has to do with William Ann and when the pie graph about the percentage of students seen by grade. And it shows that the largest percentage is the 6th grade. And I wonder if that's because of the transition into middle school. So just thinking ahead, I would be very curious to find out what that percentage is with the current 5th graders this year who are doing the platooning, to see if there's any translation with it being less of an issue, the transition, because of what they've been through this year. That would be my hope. So I would be very interested in seeing that next year. Yeah, exactly, because you won't know yet. And then the other thing is, I wonder, I was looking at the increase in visits by month. This is for middle school. And it looks like around November and around April are when there are the spikes. And it seems that that's tied into the end of marking periods also. And I wonder, only because of what I've heard from my own kids and their friends, it seems like those last 2 weeks of each marking period, there is a sudden increase in tests, in quizzes, in projects, that it seems like the teachers are trying to get everything in before the end of the marking period. And I wonder if that is what is impacting this anxiety, that the spike at the end of the marking periods.
I think it's a great observation. Definitely, you're finding a pattern there just in terms of timeliness and the calendar throughout the year. And I am confident that if the staff were here, that they would surely say that towards the end of the marking period, when it's that crunch, you want to have those final projects and assignments. It's the pressure of the end of the marking period. And so bringing students through the door, dealing with that pressure, is definitely present.
Right, well, then it leads to, okay, if that is the case, what can be done to address that going forward?
Yeah, I just had one question. I noticed when you were going over the voluntary random drug testing, at William Annan, over the 3 years that you're reporting on, it's about the same number of students being tested, but at Ridge, it dropped fairly substantially in the most recent year. And I was just wondering if you could say why that was the case? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so it was really, it was kind of a technical glitch? Okay. Okay, thanks.
I have a question about the categories in the pie chart for Ridge High School, dealing with the direct services. And I'm just curious, I know you have to have broad categories because you can't get too granular, but where would something like a student coming to see a counselor about a friend or a peer because of concern fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically where you see other, some of those peer relationships and the social interactions would fall under other.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with this information?
So that is the essential question, really. And so the end of the presentation shows you the programming update in terms of what's being done. But really, the practice is you look at this data as a team, be reflective on it, and devise your programming to speak to it. So specifically, if you're seeing trends like we've discussed this evening, so how are we strategically reaching out to students who might not be captured in this? If you're a student who, in my mind, who might not meet with their counselor, or if you see that, you'll see one piece of data where the 10th graders are taking up less time than the other grades. And so how can we look at our delivery services to make sure that we're speaking to the data and that the work that we're doing, we're directly impacting what we're seeing? So this is a review of the data, and then you come together as a team. That's why it's usually a year out, and then you devise your programming and your delivery to speak to it.
So are you looking at this over multiple years, or are you just looking at this at a 1 year, like this 1 year clip that we saw last year?
Multiple years. So for me personally, in this team, K through 12, I've been here for 9 months, and so this data speaks to last year, but we use it as a team to inform our goals going forward. And so you can see that for a lot of the information that's on here, you can see the trend data going back a couple years, 3 to 4 years out. And so if you're seeing consistent trends, or if you're seeing spikes in an odd year, what else is happening within the community or within the schools that can speak to that? And do you need to devise programming that to directly impact, what you're seeing with the kids, what the kids need? So it's a little bit of both, to be honest with you.
So it sounds like that's on a content perspective. The one thing I was looking at was these number of visits to the counselor per student. So it looks like in both WAMS and Ridge, there are, the distribution curve kind of moves to the edge, and then you have a few students or a small subset of students that are utilizing the counseling office like heavy, right? They're going for a lot of visits. So is there some way to use that in building the counseling service in terms of, dedicating a counselor to those subset of students or something, and letting the other counselors, deal with other kids or something like that? How do you address that?
Right. So your suggestion there is one way to address it. I think it depends on the kids, the year, the issues that you're seeing. And so if there are common issues, that's what would ignite a counseling program to start groups. And so if you're seeing that 27 kids, for example, just off the top of my head, are taking up X percentage amount of your time or are constantly coming to the counseling office for a chronic issue, then that's, if you're seeing that in more than one group of students, then you have a commonality there. And to build connectedness with kids, you'd put them together into a group setting to discuss those issues and to give them the space and the time to connect with an adult and each other. And so it really depends on the issue. It depends on the number of kids and the severity of the issues that you're seeing and how you would respond to that. So designating one person could definitely be a viable solution. Sometimes it's not, because you do have strong relationships with your one-on-one counselor. And so you're right that the trends are you're seeing that there's a population of students that are reoccurring and taking up a lot of time for that particular year, but perhaps they have a relationship with their counselor where it's more advantageous for that student to maintain that one-on-one relationship than to be diverted to someone else. So the SAC, specifically for mental health, their role is to support the mental health for the school counselors. And so that collaborative relationship is key. And so if the school counselors are seeing trends or needing help with heavy cases, then that's when the SACs come in.
But as far as this data goes, so one student goes to a guidance counselor for a mental health issue, so that counts as a mental health visit. They go to a SAC for a mental health, the same mental health issue, that counts as a SAC mental health visit. And then that student goes multiple times for other issues in addition to mental health. That all gets kind of computed aggregate, right? It's not normalized like per student, this one student.
Correct.
Actually, okay.
Right.
And then one of the things that I really liked was there was feedback in here somewhere, in one of these pages, about like decreasing or lessening the stigma associated with visiting the counselor. I hope that's something that, we're really trying to push and, across all of the K through 12. So I don't know how that really plays out in elementary school because the kids are a little bit younger, and middle school, I'm sure it's an issue, but I really like that that's something that the counselors are seeing, that the kids are willing and able to come to them and not feeling like it's like a shameful thing or anything. So I like that. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to follow him on those, now WAMS, I know you don't have ESS at WAMS, right? So those students that are in Ridge that are like, the ones that are coming 20 times, are any of those students, the ESS, are ESS students not even counted in the Ridge Counseling Program numbers here?
They are counted.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
So,
School counselors do work with students who also access ESS, and so just because you are in group therapy with ESS or have class with ESS doesn't mean that your work with your own individual school counselor expires.
right, but they're, I don't know
So
how
they can be
ESS
counted in there. Mhm.
They can be counted in there
Right.
visiting their counselors.
Right.
But they could also be having services from
Right.
ESS as a whole separate thing.
Right.
So any ESS visits, I'm only calling them visits because
Right.
that's how I'm thinking about it, are not here.
Right.
So this is only
Data
to
for that
counselors.
program would be separate.
Separate, okay.
Yes, yeah.
I'm just, because there's so many, like 11 kids or 12 kids make up like, I can't see again, but a lot of these visits because, so I was assuming that since they're there to help with the most demanding kids, the kids that need the most help, they would be involved in this as well? Okay. And then for the Ridge, and Mr. Kraus was talking about, and I think in the SEL, like the smaller groups, like the kids wanted to start, or the groups, right? But that's not only necessarily like for mental health, that was for any interest, right? Because I wanted to put that out there, that this wasn't just, it was like if you were like a huge Star Wars fan, or you were like, and that was the example we used, or you had a bunch of kids who had like a common interest, they could all get together and form a group that might be outside their own like friend group, or introduce them to something different or whatever. So it wasn't just that, but it was also a nice idea to get kids together and whatever. I just want to make connections that it wouldn't normally make, maybe, without the small groups, which I thought was a really nice idea.
Yeah.
I want to make one more point that this was such a great presentation, so positive, and I'm so disappointed in looking behind me. It really is. There's no one here. I mean, no offense to people who are here, because I really appreciate it, but I mean, we've had this place filled with people like throwing like daggers up at and then about this kind of stuff, but don't take the time to come see what actually is being done about it. So I'm disappointed, like tremendously disappointed, because we get yelled at, but this is such a great thing that you guys are doing, and no one comes to see, wow, this is what we're doing, because you're asking about it like so emphatically at other meetings. So, but thank you so much. I think this was great and really informative, and I'm really appreciative for all the work you guys did.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith and Mr. Kraus and Mrs. Hudak.
Okay, we're now up to superintendent's report. Did you have anything, Mr. Markarian? Okay, we're up to public comment on agenda items. If you're coming up to talk about something that was on the agenda, please write your name and address on the clipboard after you speak. Tell us your name and address when you come up to the microphone. I'm not going to go through the whole statement because there's only a few people here, and most of you, I think, have heard it before. Anyway, just make sure that you tell us your name and address when you come in and sign in on the clipboard afterwards. Thank you. Oh, there's no clipboard. It's over there. It's somewhere. It's over there? Okay.
Talk briefly first. This is actually all positive. I've been pushing a lot about health revamping and about SEL revamping. Oh yeah, my name's Melissa Moss. I live at 62 Ramapo Drive. I absolutely loved Mrs. Hudak's presentation. It's not that I didn't like the other ones, but sorry, I was filling my throat. But what I saw is a recognition that something needs to be done in terms of surveying parents and surveying students and surveying staff to try to recognize the problem. I saw bringing in professionals who are going to help potentially identify these issues and identify solutions. I kept shaking my head, yes, I'm like sore. I absolutely loved the revamping of the health curriculum at the middle school. My daughter comes home often and talks about health class, which never happened when my son was in middle school, except, frankly, to roll his eyes a little bit and laugh about it. This year, in 7th grade, my daughter's been very pleased in a lot of pieces of the health curriculum pie. Let's see, I have two more things. Last year, I just want to point out with my son, he lost stigma of going to see the counselor when Mr. West invited him as an athlete to a leadership athlete lunch bunch where they talked about some of the pressures that middle school athletes are facing and how to also be leaders amongst their peers as athletes. And it was a time that my son was feeling isolated on his swim team because a lot of the kids were doing other sports. And suddenly there was Mr. West, a guidance counselor who was also happened to be the Ridge swim coach, inviting him to talk about things that were really putting a lot of pressure on him. He absolutely loved that. So again, things in your presentation, Mrs. Hudak, just hit home, and I'm very grateful. I will say one thing that I'm a little bit worried about, which is some of the book, okay, well, she was just so impressed. Okay, I'll just say I'm a little bit worried about it when some of the book choices have a lot of adult themes, and that is okay, but I just want to make sure as a parent that the kids are talking a lot about the themes and maybe making a link in their language arts and English classes to guidance. If some of the themes in the book hit home to them, maybe, I'm not even, because I'm not there, I don't really know, and my daughter won't really tell me very much, but just to make sure when you're talking about such adult themes in some of the books, especially at WAMS, that there would be a bridge to guidance for these kids who could talk about the what do you call it from English class? Text to self relationships. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for agenda items?
Hello, this is Stella Perna, 105 Tuxford Terrace. I like the presentation because I like numbers and I like seeing patterns. The one page was on the weed tip, which I know got rolled out last week. I was under the impression that it was an app that was going to be downloaded on students' phones. Perhaps I misunderstood that. I understand cards were handed out, and from what I understand from my children, that the cards were found in garbage cans and on the floor. So that's disappointing, because if these kids do need help and they need a number to call, they don't have it. Again, one of the things I recommended was the Stop It, which that program, it brings everybody in for assembly. Everyone is required to download the app onto their phones, and they're not to leave the assembly until every single student has it. Now, if they have a cry for help, they have it on their phones. Now the card is missing. Now they have nothing. So if they need to talk, I think they've lost an opportunity. So I just wanted to bring that up again, because I know it was glossed over in the presentation, but that's a huge thing for me. I want kids to know that they are just one text away from help. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for public comment on agenda items? Okay, so I'll close that public comment at this point. We're up to approval of minutes. Would someone like to make a motion for item 1? Mr. Salmon and Mrs. Korn, seconded. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne,
Yes?
Ms. Schaefer,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Salmon,
Yes.
Mrs. White,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Korn,
Yes.
Mrs. Woldridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McCune,
Yes,
Madam President.
thank you. We're up to the Finance Committee. There are 2 items. Would someone like to make a motion? 3 items, sorry. 3 items. Would someone like to make a motion? Mrs. Woldridge and Mrs. White, seconded. Any comments? Questions?
Do you want, 2 is, 1 is disbursements, 2 is professional development, 3 is student services. And then I have minutes.
Okay, do you want to do the minutes first and then we'll vote?
Sure.
Okay.
Finance met on March 22nd. The first item up was a follow-up discussion from the preliminary budget presentation that Mr. McLaughlin made. The board asked committee members asked some follow-up questions, first about the increased costs associated with special education, which have been trending upward for the last several years. Mr. McLaughlin explained that while the projected population of special education students is projected to be flat or possibly decreasing, the levels and types of services are increasing, so that thereby increasing costs. There was a question about the introduction of Spanish at the elementary level, and Mr. Markarian explained that currently students at elementary have a technology special and a media/library special that alternate weeks. So with the introduction of Spanish, the plan is to split the technology/media time into 30 minutes of Spanish and 20 minutes of tech/media. And so in addition to replacing Latin instruction, the total instruction time for Spanish will be an hour per week. To accommodate these changes, the current 4 technology media positions will be reduced to 2, which will give us 2 positions to use for the Spanish instruction. The board members also asked about the increases in budget for behavioral disabilities and the decrease in learning and language disabilities. Mr. McLaughlin explained that the special education department had previously been moving aides between the behavioral disabilities and the language learning disabilities positions at the schools, and now we have a better way of tracking those reassignments. The board members asked about the preschool program at Mount Prospect. Mr. McLaughlin explained that the preschool program is an outreach program for in-district students. There are 59 students in half-day preschool and 10 in full-day preschool. Of the 59, 24 are general education students blended with 35 special needs students. The 10 full-day students are in the autism program. Similar numbers are projected for the next school year. The board members asked which category from the preliminary budget included the budget for ESS, which is, Mr. McLaughlin said, is under guidance services. And then with regard to the 6-year budget revenue snapshot, Mr. McLaughlin explained that for extraordinary aid, the district submits an application for reimbursable expenses in April, and then the district gets the reimbursement in August. But because we don't get the money until August, we keep those funds in excess of the anticipated budget revenue as a hedge against budget overruns. So typically, special education comes in $200,000 to $300,000 over budget. For example, in the current school year, we spent $800,000 of the $900,000 that was in excess of anticipated revenue that we received in August 2018 from the Extraordinary Aid Award from the 17-18 school year. Our tuition and miscellaneous revenue is projected to drop by about $250,000 because we have more self-contained students of our own and can't accept as many students from other districts, thereby losing tuition dollars. The second item discussed was the door hardware project that was voted on last week by the board. The board awarded the bid to C&M Doors. They have a good reputation. We're the lowest bidder and have worked on some smaller projects in the district. The contract states that the work will be completed over the summer, but they might start during the school year. The third item was the district 911 system upgrades. So in the 18-19 budget, we have budget to upgrade classrooms to dial 911 directly so they don't have to call the office first. Ridge already has this. When we upgraded the phone system 3 years ago, Mount Prospect already has it. We completed upgrades at Liberty Corner and Cedar Hill School already, but Cedar Hill needs some minor reprogramming. Over the spring break this year, WAMS and Oak Street will be done. The last item was a discussion about the Bluetooth security system on some of the doors in the district that have Bluetooth sensors on them. So there's the ability to download an app that can remotely unlock a door. So the discussion was about how to tier out access to those doors so that certain folks in the district have 24/7 access. And that was it. Next meeting is coming up.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. We're up to personnel. Personnel has not met since our meeting last week. Policy?
We haven't met either since I read it
Okay.
out last week.
Curriculum?
Curriculum meets this Friday.
Okay. Advocacy? Just met.
We met today, and I'll be reporting out at the next meeting.
And SEL?
SEL met last Thursday morning, and I'll report out at the next meeting.
Okay, so lots of reports next. Are there any liaison reports?
Municipal Alliance is meeting tomorrow, so I'll be reporting out at the next meeting.
Okay, we're up to public comment on non-agenda items. If anyone has a comment or question, make sure you tell us your name and address when you come up and put it on the clipboard afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Stella Perna again, 105 Tuxford Terrace. I had a question about seniors and the guidance counselors and how that all works in terms of when they first meet up to talk about colleges that they want to apply to, and then they are given guidance as to how to apply, think about their 5, safety, 5 target, and 5 reach. Okay, so now they get some acceptances that come in, but nobody reaches out to them. Is it incumbent on the students who've, remember, there are families where this is the first child going through this, and it's a little overwhelming, and so anxiety is high in certain households. Is it incumbent on the student to reach out to the guidance counselor, or is there an assembly that's given to the seniors to say, okay, the last of the acceptances have come through. The month of April is when you should be thinking of the following items. And is there some type of chart that they can be given to think about, not just, oh, this is a really great school, everybody recognizes it, but more intrinsic items like the quality of the teachers and of the students and of the feel of the campus and where they think they're going to end up. Because I think, the anxiety, and I remember it wasn't that long ago, I'm not that old, of not knowing what's ahead, not knowing, okay, you're going for 4 years, but it's not just the next 4 years, it's beyond that 4 years. And I think if we give those students that confidence, like, look, you're going to go somewhere, but think about what the next step is going to be. And I was hoping that the guidance would have some type of an assembly, either last Friday or today, because the timing is so important, because they do have to make a decision by May 1st. One of the things I had seen in an article, there were workshops that teachers did, I think it was after school or before school, like dorm room cooking, like really unusual workshops to give these kids some confidence, how to manage an ATM card, if they haven't had one yet, or, think about things that normally they don't do in their day-to-day lives. So those types of learnings would be really valuable for our seniors. In Girl Scouts, I'm offering up a self-defense workshop for all the young women who will be heading to college so that they know some techniques to protect themselves. So I was just kind of hoping that we would incorporate that into our school. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for public comment? Okay, at this point, I'll close public comment. I'll respond to part of your comment, just because I've been through this college thing a number of times. I think in terms of like a whole group, and I'm sure Stephanie can jump in, but as far as like the whole group of students having some kind of event at this point, I think it's so individual, and a lot of students are in different timelines. Like if some students have already made their minds up and visited their schools, and other students are just starting that process, so they're all over the place. So I think it is more individual at this, during senior year as the year goes on. In terms of the timing of all of that. And obviously, there's a lot of factors. I think all the counselors would be, willing to talk to students with, questions about how to decide what the primary factors are. But I think depending on the student and the family, some people are trying to look at the different financial offers. They may not have all their offers yet, so they don't know the facts about where they might be able to go. So they're all on different timelines. So I'm just kind of jumping in there. And obviously, you can jump in too. And I think the other part of what you're talking about is like preparing them to go away to college, which is, so I know there was some stuff last year at the end of the year, I don't remember because I didn't have a senior, but yeah, I think that's some of the feedback that I think they're trying to get from some of these student focus groups about what to incorporate in terms of programming at Ridge. That would be good feedback from the students, like what did they wish they knew before they went off to college? What should they know senior year? Stuff like that. Do you want to jump in at all?
So you definitely covered the individual aspect, and I would also add that programmatically, the way that the counseling program is designed for senior year, is that there is the large group assembly, the senior mechanics assembly at the beginning of the year, and then there are 2 established checkpoints individually that the counselors have with their seniors in January called the mid-year check-in, and then in June, after that May 1st deadline, where the conversations about your individual transition to post-secondary are happening. So the counselors have met individually with every senior in January for, kind of a pulse check on where you are, since it is so individual. And the post-secondary report that we shared in November kind of showed the statistics about the number of students who are early action and early decision, which is very typical of our Ridge seniors. And then they will again do the whole group check-in on an individual basis in June at the end of the year as well. But in that time, because it is so individual, you hit it on the head, that it is really between the counselor and the student.
Wait, I turned to the wrong page of my agenda. I think we're up to board forum, right? Okay, we're up to board forum. Does anyone have anything? Okay.
I wanted to speak to what Mrs. Hudak was saying about the effect that the cell phones and the social media was really having on kids. And for some reason, I just feel like it's not like emphasized enough, especially in the grammar schools. And I feel like part of our whole social emotional learning stuff should be educating younger parents on what a mistake it is to get your 3rd, 2nd, 4th grader a smartphone because of, and I've seen it because of it just doesn't do any, there's nothing positive about it. I find it to be there's only zero positive things can come out of young children having smartphones. Now, I understand how parents say, I want to keep track of my kid. I know flip phones, I sound like an old person, but I can't help it because I've seen, even amongst my kids' friends, the change when they get these things. And I have a 6th grader. She does not have a phone. She has an iPod, which is almost the same thing, really, but whatever. But I don't let her have social media or anything, but all her friends do, and they're great kids, but it causes so much drama just having the group chats. I was like, it creates problems that would never, ever be there before, ever. Like, so I just was like, and I know it's not always our responsibility, but I feel like since we had advocacy today, and I was like, I was wondering if we could incorporate just like I don't know, just saying, this is just a bad idea, and have like the older parents talk to younger parents about, it seems like a great idea at the time, but it can go bad so fast. Like we were saying, they have access to things that no child should have access to. And it could be by accident or on purpose or things shared with them and it seems like everyone's like, well, everyone has it. It's like a blow-off thing, and it annoys me sometimes because just because you can doesn't mean you should. So, and everyone having something is not an excuse I let my kids give to me, so I don't feel like that's an excuse that we should accept because it's so detrimental and we see it in the schools. And we see it in the schools and we see it in the presenters that come to the schools and say, what's the worst problem? Well, it's social media. Well, it's the access to everything they have. So, but it's not something that really catches much traction because of convenience. And what I've said before is that convenience makes you stupid, convenience makes you lazy. And you only want to sacrifice so much for convenience before it really can have a detrimental effect. And this is my personal feeling, but I feel like since we have this forum and we see what's doing, and since we've already heard professionals tell us the effects it's had in the schools, that's something that should get a little bit more attention. And, I mean, you read articles about it, but you can only do so much. And I know it's a personal thing. I know it's a family thing. Everyone has a right to make their own decision, but when it starts affecting in the schools, affecting other people negatively, it might be something that we want to talk about. That's all.
I can speak for, I know the elementary schools, the past few years, they've had PTO presentations with, it's a little bit like preaching to the choir, I don't really see, quite frankly, why anybody in elementary school needs a cell phone. You either go home on a bus you get home in a car, you're waiting for your parents. So, and like you, I'm probably we're probably the two onlys that, we don't have sixth graders who have cell phones. Right, no, but I'm saying, I think that
Not disparaging anyone.
that information has been put out.
Right.
And for whatever reason, there are just families that they feel differently, and there's always that push-pull.
At the beginning of each year, Karen, you always say,
Yeah.
these kids the middle schoolers do not need cell phones.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. We actually recently talked about that at one of our school counselors meetings, where we are seeing an uptick with the fifth graders coming in to sixth grade, already being exposed to a significant number of multimedia facets that are really inappropriate for them. And so I think as a district, our responsibility is to educate as much as we possibly can. And I do agree that certain things are certainly logistically out of our control. And to your point, I always say, would you give your 16-year-old the keys and let them drive down 78 with no lights on at 9 o'clock? Why would you give your child a cell phone with open access to everything? But it's challenging, as a parent, as an educator, there's new tricks and new apps and new ways to hide things coming out significantly almost every day, every second. And so it is very much hard. We were going to be talking to our elementary school partners at the end of this year about really coming down sooner and educating the administration at the elementary level as well as the counseling office from our perspective at what we're seeing with the trends coming into middle school in hopes to start educating a lot sooner. We did speak to Officer Losvecchio, our SRO, about her potentially going down and starting cyber training much sooner. I knew they do get it through their curriculums at the elementary school, those tech curriculums, but seeing an outside person and having somebody else come in and give a presentation, sometimes to the parents as well as the students, is a little bit more thought-provoking for them. But we're going to continue to work on that because we also do see that uptick in the number of students coming in already being exposed to things. And that did represent itself in the data. In Mrs. Smith's slide, if you notice what the school counselors were all identifying, were upticks in problems socially and behaviorally with students after 11 o'clock on their cell phones or doing things on the weekends, and then we get that overspill, and the elementary schools are now seeing a rise in that. Sorry to say.
I mean, like what Jen White said, the PTOs have had lots of events and speakers come, and it's usually the same group of parents that come. Karen and I were at one at Liberty Corner, and parents were asking the woman who, I forget what her name was, like, how do you get your kid to log off of Fortnite, because they're in the middle of a game and they don't want to let down their team and everything. But I mean, I have a third grader, and these kids, they might not have cell phones yet, but they're chatting live on Xbox with each other, and they find ways, you know what I mean, yeah, and with strangers on there apparently. And so, I don't know if the parents are all aware of what the kids are doing on there. I don't know, but it is concerning. Yes, Mr. Byrne.
I think the presentation for the hour that we spent, I didn't hear social media mentioned as a major cause of anything. And I think it's indicative. That's why I want to hear more information on what's causing our problems. And I think social media is one of them, but I don't think it was mentioned, or if it was, I didn't focus on it for the last hour or so that we had the presentations tonight.
It was
So-
in the qualitative feedback from the counselors in the part of the presentation, and also when Mrs. Hudak was answering your
Yeah,
question
it's-
about.
I can't even read it, it's so small.
Yeah.
I-
Does anyone else have anything?
I do, Rob.
Okay,
Can I change the subject?
go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question because.
Suzanne, can I just ask a question on the last topic?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm just curious if Stephanie's still here. Is there counseling effort specifically at the elementary level to push out information? There's all kinds of research on the damaging effects of the early exposure to these devices and the addictive qualities that it brings out in the brain. So I'm wondering if that side of it is being brought to the attention of parents who may just genuinely not realize the potential impacts.
So I know a lot of the communication that I personally have seen has been either through the principal's messages through the schools and also through the PTOs, like we're saying, the various programs and speakers who have come in. The counselors are seeing that and experiencing, the effects of social media for sure, particularly the part of the presentation with their qualitative and anecdotal feedback, and what they're dealing with is a result of just social media and exposure to devices and some of the spillover, like Mrs. Hudak was saying, into the next day. And I know recently, at the lower levels, Mrs. Hudak did put out some information to parents in her WAM's message, or the blast that she does, and with various articles as well.
Can I just say that I love this year when we get the Friday, whatever you want to call it, folder from William Ann, that there's an article at the end every week, and maybe that would be a good way to bring that to the elementary level. If we just keep inundating with articles on, this particular topic, because I think that I think parents will read it. It makes a difference. They don't necessarily show up for a meeting, but if you spoon feed it each week, in their Friday, a lot of them will read it.
And I think maybe a lot of the stuff that you're pushing out to the middle school should go to at least to the 4th and 5th grade parents. You know what I mean? Because this stuff is happening sooner. So, okay, now Suzanne.
Okay, no problem. I know it's late, but my question involves the nice presentation we heard, the feedback about the drop schedule, the AB schedule, and the 85% of everybody saying we should, go forward with this. Now what? And I am, as a person who's new on the board, I've seen this conversation been going on and on and on. Where does this go now, and who takes it over? Is this a budget question? Like, does finance get this and say, all right, do we have to build a cafeteria? Is it a discussion that we have as a board saying, is this something we're going to do? Is it that Drew gets another chance to come to us and say, yes, this is definitely what we want? I want to know the process and how we can continue to move forward making a decision within 10 years.
Go ahead. Oh, come on, Suzanne, let's go for 5.
10 years. We have 10 years to figure this out. So I think, it would be helpful to know from the board's perspective, even if it's just a little show of hands, if you want us to try to find ways to resolve the two problems. We've already worked on this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. So that makes that easy. Oh, sure, Mike. Wait until everybody else says yes. Oh, just kidding. So,
43-minute class is a major problem.
yeah. So we have anticipated this question. The district architect is coming to the next finance committee, which is on April 17th. I think when we started the process of taking a look at this and we last met with the district architect, we were focusing on how can we feed students if we're going to try to switch to this schedule in a unit lunch. And as Mr. Kraus pointed out, you have a cafeteria that was built that did not conceive of housing and or processing the number of students that we currently have in the food service lines, or even producing the amount of food that we would need to do in a single lunch, when we're basically serving lunch practically all day already, in order to try to feed the students. So that was where we really began with the biggest hurdle, and that hurdle still exists. Having met with the consultant in the fall and looked at the classroom space situation, and then one visit to Mrs. Fox's office will show you that she spent a ton of time kind of recalibrating and working with the high school supervisors and Mr. Kraus to kind of verify this room crunch issue. And then that was further verified by the chart that Mr. Kraus showed you tonight relative to the number of students that we're trying to work through our classrooms, especially some of the regular classrooms. But, as I pointed out earlier, just the overall crunch in space in order to try to take 9 periods of work and fit them into 8 periods. So I asked our architect to come back and revisit the issues to be broader than just the food issue. And obviously, if we're going to talk about adding classroom space to try to make this an opportunity for the students, it's going to be much different than just trying to add some space and a kitchen to feed the kids. It'll come as no surprise that building classrooms is very costly. So we'll have that conversation with the district architect, and we can report back out.
So that's the next step. That's awesome. Thank
That's
you.
what's happening this
Okay.
month in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just a quick plea to the board members. If, as I mentioned, we're meeting on Friday with the curriculum committee. If you have any curricular-related questions from tonight's presentation, could you please forward them to me tomorrow? Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you to, I think the past few presentations that we've got from the staff and the administrators have been really phenomenal. All the presentations I generally think are great, but like between the complete revamping of the gifted and talented program and then this presentation tonight, like the very labor-intensive heavy lifts and a lot of data in here, especially this nice thick presentation. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I know that a lot of the work on the rotating drop we kind of farmed out to you all, so that was much appreciated that you went through those exercises and went to the schools, to the administrators and staff, so I really appreciate all that.
Anyone else? Okay, I agree with what Tim just said. Thank you, guys. It was great. It was a lot of information. So, okay, we need to have a move. Somebody has to move for adjournment. Mrs. White, Mrs. Skowski. All in favor? Ms. Schaefer, sorry. All in favor? Aye?